Hello YouTubers, Jim from Ohio here, and we're in the garden today. What we're going to do is we're going to make up some of the best organic, all-natural fertilizer that we can possibly come across. And we're going to use this right here. This is a plant that's known as Comfrey. Now Comfrey is a plant that kind of looks like a lamb's ear or some other variety like that. But what this plant is really known for is making a comfrey tea. Now, it does have some medicinal value, and before you take this yourself or make any tea to drink from this, you should probably do a lot of studying and maybe check with somebody more professional or that knows what they're doing with plants. We're not going to talk about that kind of comfrey tea today. What we're going to talk about is something we're going to use as a fertilizer in our garden. And another thing about this plant is if you're the type of person that has problems with either poison ivy or poison oak, or if you tend to get really itchy around okra or corn, you're going to want to protect yourself before you get around this type of plant. This plant, it kind of has a feel like, well, almost like okra, or if you've ever picked pumpkins or squash and you grab the vine and there's little spikes on it. The leaves are covered with that, and it's almost like a Velcro. If you wear certain types of gloves, leather gloves or anything, and you grab one of these leaves, it'll actually stick to the glove. But it is a quite itchy plant, so protect yourself. Wear either long sleeves or gloves when you're handling it. Now, what this plant does is it has a very, very deep taproot that goes into the ground, and it pulls minerals, all types of minerals, up to the surface and into the leaves and stems of this plant. And it can go down deeper, a lot deeper than many of the other plant varieties in your garden. And so since it's kind of a mining plant, it mines those minerals from the soil, we can take this and make a tea out of it, and that tea will then have those minerals. And then you can take that tea and pour it all over anything in your garden. It's a type of fertilizer that you don't have to worry about overusing. You don't have to worry about burning your plants. You can put it directly on any type of plant in your garden, and it'll get a benefit out of this. Now, the way that I harvest it, this plant does get quite tall. It can reach up to probably 6 or 7 feet tall. If I had a trellis here, or if I had this growing in some type of like a tomato cage or a basket, it would continue getting taller and taller. I don't have it set up that way. So what happens is when it starts getting too tall, it'll kind of fall over into the yard. And you can see how it's done this on the back side here. And what I typically do when I harvest this is you can cut this plant all the way down to within probably about 6 inches of the base without worrying about damaging or hurting this plant. It will thrive and it'll come back just as strong as ever. But what I typically do is when it gets like this, I'll typically go and I'll mow that down. I'll just take a pair of clippers and start cutting all this stuff that's fallen down. And then that's what I'll use to make my tea. And I've already done that on the front. It was starting to fall over, and when I mow the lawn, it was kind of getting caught up in the mower, so I went ahead and just chopped that down. And so that's what I'm going to make use of. Now, it couldn't be easier the way you process this. Just get yourself a bucket and chop it up into small pieces. And you can see here through the magic of video and editing, we've got it all chopped up in our buckets. Now, you don't have to chop it up too small. I just took this and chopped the stem. You're not going to want to have any full leaves or giant pieces in there, but it really doesn't matter. This is a very forgiving method of doing this. There's no right or wrong, no rules that you have to follow to make it right. But just get as much as you can packed down into the bucket. And then what I like to do with this is when you put, we're going to fill this up with water, and then we're going to let it sit for a long time. It will tend to float when you start filling it up with water. So what I like to do is just take a brick and sit in there right on top of the leaves, and that's going to hold the leaves down. And then I'm going to take my water hose and just let the bucket start to fill up until it's all the way up near the top. And we're just going to leave it like that and let it sit. Now, how long you let it sit is going to really depend on how quickly you need to use it. Now, you should let it sit for at least a week. 2 weeks is better. But the longer you let it sit, the more of those minerals will be extracted from those leaves and stems. So you're going to get more benefit out of it and have to do it less frequently. I typically let this sit for at least 4 weeks, sometimes 5 weeks. Now, this will turn into a slimy, stinky mess. I typically put it at the back of my yard next to my compost pile, way over there, far from my deck. Now, I do put a lid on it, and that way I don't have to worry about tipping it over or spilling it or an animal getting into it. And then that does keep some of that smell inside of the bucket. But in about 4 or 5 weeks, when I go to use this and you take the lid off of the bucket initially, it is going to stink. It's going to be something you're not going to want to stick your hands in. You're not going to want to get it on you. And what we'll do then is we're going to have to fish that brick out somehow. So I recommend you have some rubber gloves handy. And then we're going to need to somehow get all of those leaves out of there so that we can use the water that's left behind that has all of the nutrients in it. Now, one other question you might be asking is, where do you get comfrey? If you know what it looks like, you can harvest it in the wild because it does grow pretty much everywhere across the U.S. and I imagine it's in a lot of other countries too. But most nurseries, if it's a good nursery or farm supply store, they're probably going to have comfrey there. Now, I picked mine up from, we have an Amish greenhouse that's nearby, and Amish people take advantage of this type of fertilizer since it's natural and organic. They've been using this for years and years. So any well-equipped greenhouse is probably going to have this. There are 2 or 3 different varieties of this that grows in the United States, and you can usually tell the different varieties by the color of the flowers that grow on it. And this does grow purple flower, and I really don't know the name of the variety, but I'll try to track that down and maybe have it by the time I post this video. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and put a cover on this bucket. We're going to set it in the back of our yard, and we're going to come back to it in about 4 or 5 weeks when it gets real slimy and sticky and ready to use. Okay, so I've got a flat piece of ground right here next to the comfrey plants. And it's a place that gets some sunshine during the daytime. That is the east over there, and the sun comes up there. So it's going to get some sunshine in the early part of the day. And then it's going to be shaded here by my solar panels during the real hot part of the day. As far as whether you keep this in the sun or the shade, I imagine it would probably be better to keep it as shaded as possible. I really don't know. I know some of the people that I learned this from, they didn't really specify one way or the other where you store this. I guess if we wanted it a little bit more in the shade, then we could probably put it all the way under the solar panels. I could probably put it over under my compost pile. This shady area right here tends to stay shaded most of the time, but it's not really flat right there, and I don't want it out in the grass. So I think I'm going to just leave it right here next to its parent plants where it came from. We're just going to go ahead and snap that lid on there, and we should be good to go and let this brew away. And what I think I'm going to do, I'll probably go ahead and start trimming back there and make another bucket of this. That I mentioned that you can use it at different stages, either 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And the longer you let it brew, the better. So I think what I'll do is go ahead and clean up the rest of this and get it in another bucket and either use it sooner than this bucket or a little bit later. Now, one other thing that's really great about comfrey is now this plant, you don't want to plant it in a place that you don't want it to grow. It is very, very invasive, and it will tend to continue growing, and it's tough to get rid of it once you've got it established in a different area. But with that said, we're going to use that to our benefit. You see that I actually have two of these plants right here. I've got one right here and one right here. And we started out with just one small plant that was about 6 or 8 inches tall that we got from that Amish nursery. And what I did was once this grew up and got about the size it is now, I just went down to the base of it with a shovel and broke a piece off, basically split the plant in two, and that is how I ended up with this plant right here. So basically doubled what I had, and so I've got plenty of it to go. And then I did go ahead and I've got a couple other starts of the same plant right over here. This is one of them, this is one of them, and this is one. Now, this has been here. We put this in last year, and you can see it is starting to grow up. But that stuff over there is a lot bigger, and I think that's just because it does like being in the sunshine, and it definitely gets a lot more sunshine over there than it does here. So what I may do is dig one of these up and maybe put it somewhere else in my yard. And I always like to have plants like this that I utilize pretty often. I consider it a value to the yard, a value to the garden, and I want to make sure that nothing happens to it. I've always got additional stock to use. So I like to move it around the yard and utilize it in different places. And that way, if for some reason, if this were to die, hopefully by this being a distance away, it's not going to be affected by any blight or whatever might have killed the main crop that's over here. Now, another way you can use this plant, if you don't want to brew the tea or deal with the smell or the sliminess that I mentioned is going to come along with what's over there in the bucket, you can use this actually as what's referred to as the chop and drop method. The leaves and stems have those minerals, and the minerals are going to be utilized wherever you leave them. So if you were to just strip some leaves off of here, cut them up, and say drop them around the asparagus bed and just leave them right on the soil as they decompose on the surface of the soil there, those minerals will be left behind and will be utilized by the asparagus or wherever you put it in your garden. So it is a very beneficial plant to have around. It is something that can be utilized in several different manners, and so we're going to take advantage of it in our garden. Anything we can do organically, we're going to take advantage of. So I'm going to go ahead and let this brew away, and we'll come back later on and you can see how I apply it. Okay, it's been about 6 to 8 weeks since we've mixed up our natural fertilizer using our Comfrey plant here. Now, the next step is very easy. I mentioned before that this is going to be pretty stinky and yucky stuff. So what I've done is I've got another bucket right here that we're going to simply pour the mixture into, but to filter out some of that leafy material that's in there, what I've done is built a simple frame. Now, this frame is something that's just made out of wood, and I've got some hardware cloth screening that has 1/4 inch openings in it. I apologize for that blue jay having to fit in the backs. I guess I'm interrupting his dinner or something. But when I made this frame, I made it so that it fits right on top of my bucket, and it sits firmly so it's not going to wobble or anything. So the idea is we're going to pour the solution through this screen, and hopefully that's going to help us get out some of that yucky material. And then we'll take it and we'll simply pour that fertilizer into one of our watering cans, and we should be good to go to take this to the areas of our garden that we want to use it. Now, it is late in the year. We're in September now, so the idea is to replenish some of the soil in our garden that has produced well for us throughout the year. We want to replenish those nutrients, those minerals and everything, so that we have a good harvest next year. So let's go ahead and get started and see how well this works. These buckets are always a little difficult to get open, but yeah, we've got all that yucky green material has kind of, even with that rock in there, a lot of it has floated to the top. So we're just going to try to pour off as much of that as we can. There we go, and we've got our brick in the bottom nice and clean and ready to use for the next time. Now, this smelly green stuff, we can simply take this and put it back into our compost pile and let it just compost down with everything else. And here's the good stuff. So we'll just take it and we're going to put it into our watering can. Now the one thing we'll have to watch out for is there is some leafy material still in this. Anything larger than a 1/4 inch was able to go through that screen. So there is the possibility of this spout getting clogged up. So you do want to make sure that you're using a water can that has a removable spout that you can take and clean out if needed. Obviously anything that gets into these little holes that are in here will surely clog this quite a bit. But let's go ahead and put it into our watering can and put it to use. So this is the bed where we grew our onions this year, and we had a really good onion crop. You see a couple onions there on the ground. This is kind of a size comparison. You can see by the size of my hand, that's about the size of a baseball. And the majority of the onions we grew in this bed were between baseball size and softball size. And this one just didn't make it into the bucket because it was a little bit soft when we planted it. But this bed did real good for us, so we want to be sure to replenish the nutrients. So we're going to just go ahead and spread this stuff around, and then we don't have to put it down thick. This is going to be good, strong stuff. Just a nice light coating everywhere. And after we get this bed done, I think we'll go right over there to the asparagus bed next. Now, 5 gallons of this stuff is about what we made, and 5 gallons isn't going to go that far with a large size garden like we have. So by having lots of comfrey plants all over the yard, we're able to make up as much of this stuff as we need all throughout the year. This is pretty smelly stuff. If we had smell-o-vision, you probably would not be happy with it right now. But anyway, I think you get the gist of how this works and what the process is, so you can do this for yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and spread this throughout the rest of the garden, and you guys have a great and wonderful day. Take care. This is Jim with Jim Jenny, Ohio, signing off.